Hello, everyone. Welcome to Success in Seconds, brought to you by the Loyola University Chicago Success Coaching staff. Today, we will be going over forming study groups and study group tips in general. I want to start off this PowerPoint by saying, what is a successful study group? So here is the definition. It's when students come together to work in a small group to achieve a common goal. Study groups can be one of the most effective methods of studying, but sometimes they can be distracting and unproductive, which is why I will go over some tips on how to combat those. First things first, general structure tips. You want to think about your setup. So you want to find people to study with. And this can be an awkward and difficult thing for some people to do, but just one example of how to approach this is walking up to someone in your class or a peer or someone in the corner of the class, doesn't matter, and just saying, "Are you in a study group yet? I was thinking of starting one." And some common questions that follow this are, is it better to study with friends or with people you don't know? And there's really no objective answer to this. The only answer I can tell you is that's really up to you. So try both and then decide what's best. The next thing to think about is to identify your purpose. So study groups can be structured to accomplish different things. Some groups like to meet weekly to keep on top of the material for that week, while other groups are focused on practice problems or preparing for exams or finals specifically. Like I said, these groups can have different purposes, so I'll just go over some things that you can think about when identifying your group purpose. So one thing is discuss and review content each week, so that's more of the maintaining content each week. You can quiz each other in preparation for an exam or test, brainstorm ideas for papers or projects, or work through difficult problems for lab or homework. You also want to keep in mind to ask your professor first before starting a study group. It might be nice to check in for clarity on expectations regarding study groups. So some things you want to think about are what types of assignments are okay to work on together. What do your professors expect for you to work on individually versus with a group? One example of this is that some professors may encourage you to practice together for an exam, but those same professors may also expect lab reports to be completed independently. So you just want to really make sure that you have the skills to navigate that alone. You also want to keep it small, so size can make a difference when you're studying. And also some people forget this, but study groups can be as small as 2 people. But also when sometimes groups get too large, these groups can be loud and hard to organize. Just remember, you want to be able to practice with each other. That's the whole point of studying with each other. So taking turns with a large group can kind of mean less practice for individuals sometimes. Some people find it helpful to cap a group at 5 to 6 people, but also keep in mind if you do like those bigger groups or don't want to shun anyone away, if more people join, then you have more opportunities to break out into smaller groups within the large group. You also want to think about where, when, and what. So obviously where, you want to set a location that meets the needs of the group. So some examples of locations could be study rooms in the library, someone's house, coffee shops, etc. You also want to choose a place that has little distractions and a neutral territory that everyone can access. Another thing to keep in mind is that space does not necessarily need to be a physical space, especially with the times right now. So study groups can work together using online tools such as Google Docs, Zoom, etc. When you want to avoid the marathon sessions, so 3 to 4 hours might be a little bit too long for groups. So really think about setting breaks and time limit within your group and take a break every 45 to 60 minutes if needed. The last thing is what. So this is really highlighting the goal and identifying your goal for your session. And sometimes this can be hard. So an example is if you say, I want to study for the test together, that is an intention, but it lacks in a specific plan. And it can interfere with being productive. So instead of saying, I want to study for the test together, you would say, I want to create a study guide over chapters 4 and 5 that highlights the what and the content, completed in the next 2 hours, which highlights the how long you need to study, with at least 2 sentences for every item in the guide. And that highlights how much you want to study within your notes. The next thing is to develop expectations for working together. And this is really important just because it minimizes the unproductivity within the group. So I just briefly put on some tips of what different expectations you can think about. So first things first, you want to think about what should each person do to prepare for the meetings. What are you going to do if you get off track? What steps do you want to take to stay productive? And if things do get off track, do you want to have a convener? How are you going to contact each other, and what other things should you discuss before getting started? So one example of this is transportation, if everyone can access online or the internet, etc. The second part is identifying your group goals, which I've went over briefly, but I'm going to dive into specific activities on how to actually navigate through that. So after you know your goal, consider the following. And these are just some quick notes on how to actually study with groups. So obviously don't just look at your notes. You want to look at your peers as they speak and when you speak. As you work to memorize information, looking up and looking at each other will help more than simply reading your notes from your pages. You want to work on putting concepts in your own words. So using your own words is more effective as a learning technique than copying verbatim. Disagreement isn't bad. So this will specifically arise if you're in a group, because obviously the wisdom of a group will be different than individually. And keep in mind that this isn't a bad thing. Different viewpoints and different processes will help the group clarify the idea. So just keep that one in mind. Ask questions to each other and be gracious as people learn. So make your group a safe space for people to ask questions, talk through ideas. That's what the point of the group is. And here I just listed some quick activity types for you to do, some of the skills that we just stated in the last slide. So review and clarify information, teach each other, create mind maps or outline mind maps, identify the keywords, work ahead, do and talk process, quiz each other, do practice tests together, walk through a test if you've already done it. And sometimes professors let you have like a one note card cheat sheet. So if that is the case, talk about what you would want to put on your note card and why. And this really highlights what each individual thinks is important, which can generate dialogue within the group too. And the last thing is ending the group session. And this is an important part because it kind of creates next steps. So I'm just going to briefly go over some tips that people find helpful when they end the group. So number one, you want to identify where you left off so you can continue it during the next session or on your own. So having a note keeper do that would be helpful, or just have a designated person to remember what specifically was said within the sessions. The second thing is talk about what worked well as a group, as well as improvement. So this is really going to shape the future of your sessions and really highlight what you want to stay away from. And the last thing is identify when you will meet next, and make that specific, because sometimes people can say in a week or 2 weeks, but if you're studying for a final, you really want to have those hard, concrete deadlines of when you want to meet, and specifically what content you want to go over and what type of styles you want to incorporate for the activity of the group. And that is the end of the presentation. Thank you if you got that far listening. If you have any questions, you can find us at www.luc.edu/tutoring/hours services/success coaching.